Change can't be avoided. It's a life companion, sometimes welcome and sometimes despised. It promises to always be present and demands collaboration if we are to ride the waves of existence. We're launching a new series on this pilgrimage about it. We've all gone through huge changes the past few months and it's not been easy, but it's taught us all a lot, no doubt. How can we embrace the uncertainty it brings? What can we learn? Welcome to our first series.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have everyone listening with us that is, and we appreciate the fact that you've chosen to click on this.
Yes.
And today, our kind of title is Cultural Change. And we want to look at our own response to change. So, when we are put in a certain environment, how can we respond in the best way to that? And that might be a bit deceiving because maybe you clicked on this thinking that this is going to be about cultural change and what I can bring and what it should look like to bring cultural change in a situation, because especially in the millennial age group, there's been a lot of books written about change management, how to manage change, how to bring about change in especially like a business kind of environment. And I think that obviously there's a place for those things, and both of us when we were at university studied those things in our respective spheres. But at the same time, we believe that actually we can learn a lot by going to another culture, and actually we shouldn't go in all guns blazing thinking, oh, we are going to bring about this and this and this and we're going to change this and that, but actually we need to have a bit of humility. So that's kind of the reason behind this
Yeah.
episode.
And I think what got us thinking is obviously, if you've tuned in today, you've probably realized that we haven't released a podcast in a couple of months now, which is
Yep.
really bad. But in a way, it's not bad because we didn't want to just add to the noise. And we had a bit of a change of scenery, went on a bit of a holiday, which we're really grateful for because this year is obviously a bit chaotic. But it got us thinking with the whole traveling thing of how much we love traveling because we've learned so much from different cultures, haven't we? Like, I'm thinking back to so I think the biggest travel change thing that we've done together, the biggest cultural change we've experienced together is when we went to Thailand.
Yeah.
Asia is just so different to our
Very
culture,
different.
and it was incredible. Just, I think you learn so much from seeing how people interact with each other, interact with you as a foreigner, how people eat, how people share things. And obviously, it wasn't a very long trip. We're there for like 2 weeks or 3 weeks, can't remember. But
Yeah.
we've learned so much from the different bits of travel we've done, and it got us thinking about this whole thing, and it kind of came out of this. And for us, every time we've experienced a different culture, it's really made us realize that it's an opportunity for us to grow and to grow in humility, most of
Yeah,
all.
and to learn as well.
Exactly, to not
Yeah.
go there and be like, oh, you should do things like this, but to put yourself in the people's shoes and think, why do you do things like this? And why is it so different? And how can we bring those differences together and have a greater picture of what life is?
Yeah.
It's a very beautiful thing. And I was going to ask you, what do you think is the biggest like change in culture that you've experienced, whether it's like a trip we've done together or not?
I always remember, I think part of it is because I was quite young at the time, but I went to Morocco when I was I think I was 11 years old with my dad on like a mission trip. So we went and did loads of things in different communities in Morocco, which is a very Muslim country, and we were obviously going as Christians. So I remember we got like raided by the police, and obviously in England that never happened, and they wanted to like check that we weren't giving out Bibles, or I can't quite remember. But I remember going to the market one of the days and I was absolutely terrified because I was obviously a young kid, and there's so many smells and sights and sounds, and we were quite out in like the middle of nowhere. It wasn't a city, it was like a desert kind of market. And I remember walking around, and then you walk past this like butcher's part,
Oh
and I
dear.
remember seeing like a goat's head just sat like next to me, and it was like, ew. um, and it's funny because some of the guys actually bought that goat's head because we had to bring back the most interesting thing from the market, and so they thought that would be interesting, so they brought that back. But there was also a witch doctor that arrived, and so all these people gathered around him, and I remember looking at him and kind of making eye contact and being a bit like, ooh, it's a bit scary.
Yeah.
So I think for me that was probably it.
Wow.
What about you?
Oh no, now I feel like I don't have some like crazy story. I traveled a lot in Europe when I was younger, and then I went to America, and then we went to Asia. But I've not done like Africa or Australia. So I've not done like many exotic trips. But I think just in Europe, you go to another country, and like even for me coming from Switzerland, we've got many neighboring countries, and you just cross the border, and you've got a very different experience.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. Like when we've driven to Switzerland from here, from England, we always say like you literally cross the border from France into Switzerland, and you feel
It feels
different.
different. Yeah, it's crazy.
It is crazy.
Even in Switzerland, I'd say you have different cultures because
massively.
you have different languages. And it's funny how I think a language brings a culture with it a lot of the time,
Totally.
which is quite interesting to think about. And, you know, I find as someone who's trying to learn French, you have to get into a certain mindset in order to speak and understand French that's different to when you're speaking English.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting point as well, to think about getting into a way of thinking in order to speak and understand a language better, because
Totally.
it's very connected in that way.
Yeah. So it's coming up to me coming here like what am I saying? It's coming up to
you
my
being
6th
here.
anniversary of living in England, just next month in October. And if I think back to like how I spoke English when I first came to how I do now, it's so different. Not just in like I've learned more words, but in terms of expressions and humor and communicating with other people. I've really learned so much about that. And it's true, you literally, it's like you put on a different persona to be able to, I don't know, to speak that language. And you think, oh, well, language is just about grammar and verbs and words, but it's about so much more than that.
Yeah, and they always say if you can make a joke in another language, that's when you've really understood it.
You're still on that journey, aren't you?
What, in
With
French?
French.
Well, yeah, I did
It's
say
funny.
one joke once when we were there, and everyone was like, "Oh, he said a joke or
He's
something."
joking.
But even if I understand a joke, I'm quite happy with myself
Yeah.
usually.
No, you are funny. I'm joking. You are funny. We were also earlier talking about food and how much that's part of a culture.
Yeah, I think when I think about being English and living in England, especially when I've lived in England, I've always lived around London. I've always been close to London, and London is like the multicultural city. There is so many different languages and people and cultures that are represented in London. It's almost like its own country within the UK. I guess any city is a bit like that, but I really think London has something special of that, even in the outskirts of the city. And it's funny being in, it's like you're in the country, like I was born in near London, so I'm in the country where I'm from, where I was born. And yet you learn so many different cultures just by living in that kind of space. And I
Yeah.
think there's something about England that is represented even with our food within that. Like, for example, I think it was Jewish refugees.
Because you can't cook, so you
Well, yeah,
steal
I
other
do think
people's
that is
food.
a reason. And one of the reasons that English food doesn't have a lot of its own identity is because we've had so many different cultures that have always seemed to end up here, whether that was by choice or sadly from people being forced to come here. But
Yeah.
I think it was Jewish refugees that even brought fish and chips, which is like
Really?
the British dish. I think
No
I saw
way.
I don't know if anyone else has seen this, but there was an advert that Gary Lineker did about it recently.
Really?
Yeah.
That's funny. And curry
I
being
was
one
going to
of
say
your,
curry is the national dish now,
yeah.
tikka masala, which I think that represents England and our culture in a nutshell. The fact that it's British Indians that actually invented or like kind of came up with tikka masala in the UK,
Hmm.
because we've kind of taken the curry culture from India and Pakistan and places like this and have applied it to fit what we like. So like the rice, the naan, the curry, that's like the typical kind of way of doing it in England. And so they've made this recipe
Mm,
from that, and it's now become the national dish. That represents England quite well, I think,
yeah.
in that way.
It's quite interesting because if I think of England, or sometimes how England can be kind of portrayed as a cliche, you'd think of like people, almost kind of like Switzerland. Like you'd think of, oh, my phone keeps slipping. You'd think of people just being in their nice little houses, having a roast together, not really mixing. But curry is the polar opposite of like it's a communal
I think
meal,
that's why the
and
British people love it, because it's
yeah,
given us a taste of something that we wouldn't have really had before. Although
different.
you do have Sunday roast, which is, I guess, English,
It's very English.
but and that is very family based. You sit around the table. That's the idea.
Mm.
But yeah, I think if you've lost that, something like curry, it suddenly brings that back a little bit as well.
The thing I don't understand about England, or there's many things, although I love being here, but party rings. Why do people like
Yeah,
eating these
I don't know.
biscuits?
It's the kind of thing that when you're a kid, you just eat it, but when you
Yeah.
grow up, you're like, what? Like,
Why did I eat this?
what is nice about this? It tastes like
Yeah, but
cardboard with a
people
bit of
still,
icing on
like
it.
in our youth group, if you bring party rings,
And
people
they
love it.
love it.
Love
Yeah,
it.
they love it.
Not just the youth, but like the people that run it
I
as
think
well.
it's memories as well. Food
It
has
must
memories
be.
attached to it, doesn't it, as well?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Brown sauce. Oh my word. That is
I love
literally
brown
the
sauce.
devil in a bottle.
A
I hate
bacon
it.
sandwich with brown sauce is... I love that.
So anyone listening to this who knows me knows that I can't have vinegar, and I really have a hate for vinegar. And I went down one morning, Fraser was having breakfast. I think I just came out of bed as well, and I gave you a kiss, and you had just had a mouthful of whatever with brown sauce, and I thought I was going to faint. I was like, this literally stinks. It's horrible.
Yeah.
You have to be British
Yeah,
to eat it.
I think so. But then, like we said about Switzerland and how there's some very specific foods in Switzerland as well. Like fondue is the one that we were talking about, and that is, again, it's a communal meal that's literally around one pot of this cheese that's been
Just
melted.
cheese, yeah.
Um,
Cheese and bread. We love carbs and
yeah,
cheese.
simple. But it's
Very
funny
simple.
because I think your dad was telling me that traditionally it was like quite a poor meal.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was like farmer's meal.
All of our main like national dishes are because people lived in like really harsh conditions in mountains and stuff, and so they had
Carbs are warming, aren't they? And
well,
they,
yeah, and like
yeah.
potatoes grown in like harsh conditions, so they could have like potatoes. We have this meal that I absolutely love called raclette, and it's like a big bit of cheese that you melt and then you scrape it onto potatoes. But if you think about that, like bread and cheese with fondue or raclette with potatoes and cheese, it's just what was available. Like
Yeah.
the cows made
Yeah, the cows, yeah.
dairy and. But it
But
is
then
very
it's
communal,
funny how
actually.
it's very expensive now.
Yeah.
Like if you go to a Swiss restaurant and get that, either one of those dishes, raclette or fondue, it's so expensive.
Yeah.
So it's funny how it was like a pauper's meal, but now it's so expensive because of
Same with
the
pizza, isn't
economy.
it, in Italy?
Yeah, it is, yeah. But then that's the other point I was going to make about England. You can go to London, for example, and get a really good curry, a really good Italian. Like there's even a Swiss restaurant in London that we want to
Yeah.
go to.
Greek,
Really good French food, really good Greek food,
Lebanese.
and it's funny when a culture has really good opportunity to like show all of these different food things, you lose the identity of what British food is, and I think some people are trying to kind of rekindle that a little bit by like gastropubs and stuff
Yeah.
and things like that. So the reputation that there's no good food in England, I would not agree with that depending on where you are.
Yeah.
And
I
like
agree with
London,
you.
you have some. I think we've said this before.
Yeah.
There is good food.
Very
in London.
nice food. I'm joking. There is very nice English food, and I've learned to
Yeah.
appreciate it since. I still think having pizza and chips is super weird, or pizza and
Yeah.
garlic bread. You guys love carbs even more than us, the
Yeah,
Swiss.
pizza and garlic bread, it's nice, but it is probably not the
It's a
best
bit
meal to
much.
have. Yeah.
No, I'm joking. There is nice food in England for sure. Sticky toffee pudding. Okay, I'm closing the food chapter. All of this to say, you don't have
Culture
to.
is connected to food.
It is
It's an
massively because
example.
food is something you always share with people, and so much happens around the table in terms of language, like we talked about,
Yeah.
humor, all of this. It all mixes together when you join around food. But yeah, you really don't have to go far to get a bit of a cultural shift. And we would encourage. We've always said like with friends that maybe get to kind of a crossroads where they finish their studies or they want to go into studying, they don't know what they're doing. We would really encourage them to go traveling, and we
Yeah.
said like one day if we have kids and they're grown up and stuff, we'll really encourage them like go and see something else. I think it's crucial for all of us, and we've seen it with some people we know that haven't really had this opportunity or haven't taken up the opportunity to go and see something else, that
Yeah.
it's obviously that they're great people, but it's almost like there's something missing of like understanding other people, relating to other people, you being more of a well-rounded individual, I think. And we totally appreciate some people don't necessarily have the finances to go and travel, and
But then it doesn't need to be expensive. Like,
no, and you don't have to go far
no. And, if you ever need some contact with other people in other places, we know a few people that they'd love to have people
to
with
welcome
them.
people in their home.
But, you know, in our experience looking at holidays, it's been cheaper to go over to Europe than it is to stay in the UK. And some UK places, like Centre Parks, it's so expensive. And
That's a very British thing as well,
it is,
actually.
yeah. So
Going to Centre
to
Parks.
go to with Airbnb now, you can get flights for really cheap with EasyJet and go and stay somewhere completely
It's worth
different. And
it.
yeah, it's great. And but yeah, the financial thing is obviously an issue. But like we said, if you do live in the UK or like most places around Europe now, you can experience other cultures and go to someone from a different culture's house for dinner and ask them
Exactly.
questions. Don't just like be English and be like, "Oh, I'm not eating that" or whatever. And that's the point from the podcast today is about when we want to bring about change or we experience change, we need to embrace it with an open mind.
Yeah.
And I think the word that we would summarize is humility. We'd use to summarize because we have to be humble in life generally, but when you go to another culture, like we were saying, like if you're traveling, hopefully you don't go and be like, "Oh, you guys should change this and this. Why do you eat that food?"
You should
But
do it like that, blah, blah, blah.
yeah, but actually these things are deeply rooted in who the people are and the culture that has formed. And so you go there to learn and you go with an open mind. And if you don't speak the language, you try and pick up words and you ask them what that means, and you're kind of at their mercy to explain it to you, especially the typical Brit on holiday doesn't speak the language and just expects everyone to speak English to them and stuff like that. So you're at their mercy. If you're in Spain and they decide no, we're not going to speak English to you, you've got no hope of being able to communicate with people. So I think that's another thing. You have to be humble when going into a new culture as
Yeah.
well.
And you can definitely then apply this to more everyday kind of situations where you go somewhere, when you meet people, when you go and work someplace, just to have this attitude of I'm coming here as kind of an outsider, which, will be welcomed in, but has to learn the context, the settings, the rules, the
Yeah,
ways of doing things.
yeah,
And it'll always be better for us to come with humility, even if we also have things to bring, than to come barging in, kind of saying, here's everything I know.
yeah,
But actually, to come more and saying, what do you know? What can I learn? Is
yeah,
always going to be, I think it's going to open many doors for you.
yeah. It's an attitude or like a disposition, isn't it, to learning and to engaging with people. And yeah, I think all of those things, language, food, and just travel in general, they can teach you things. And having said that, you can be a well-traveled person, but just go to McDonald's wherever you go and just hang out in the touristy places, and you haven't really traveled, you know. Or
Yeah.
you can still stay in the UK your whole life, but be well-rounded because you've engaged with other people from other cultures
That's right.
and
It's
learn
the
from that.
people, isn't it? It is the
It is,
people.
yeah. It's not just about going to geographical locations.
No.
Yeah.
Yes. So that was what we wanted to talk about today in this first episode of the Change series. We hope
Yeah.
that you've enjoyed it, enjoyed learning a bit more about, well, lots of food today, I must say. Maybe we're hungry.
We went on a bit of a tangent about food,
We
but
did,
I
yeah.
think it's quite a good example.
We're foodies, so
Yeah.
there you go. So go and have something different today. Go and taste a curry or a ramen.
I don't know if that's different, but yeah.
Or maybe there's international people listening. Thanks for tuning in. And
Yeah.
we'll see you soon.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.